Last week, the Senate Armed Services Committee advanced its fiscal 2022 Defense Authorization Act. The National Defense Authorization Act is something that's done every year. It's one of those must-pass pieces of legislation. It's the only one that gets passed every year. But in it, there is a provision that would require women to register for the draft. They would have to register for the Selective Service, and if a draft was put back in place, we haven't had one since the 70s, but if it were put back in place, women would be drafted just like men. Now, the House Armed Services Committee will be marking up its version of the bill and its subcommittees beginning tomorrow. Joining me now to talk about this and more is Congressman Mark Green, who is a member of the House Armed Services Committee. He represents the 7th Congressional District of Tennessee. He is also a decorated combat veteran, an ER physician who founded 2 medical clinics that provide free health care to underserved populations. Congressman Green, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. Always a pleasure to be with you guys.
And I should mention you were also a candidate for Secretary of the Army under President Trump. So I'm sure this is something you've thought about. And so what's happening here?
Well, it looks like and we don't really know. I couldn't find who proffered the amendment. I'm sure we could dig around and get to the bottom of it. But someone over on the Senate side in the SAS dropped an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that would require women to register to vote or register for the draft. And, people in my district are just not ready for that, Tony.
I mean, I'm like you, I'm sure you would agree. Women, I'm excited if they want to serve in the military. I encourage them to do it. My daughter talked about, she's a nurse, talked about serving in the medical corps. If she wants to do that, I'm all excited about that. But I am not excited about forcing our daughters to register to go into a draft. Quite frankly, I think it speaks volumes about the character of a nation if we'll let our daughters fight our wars for us, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is an issue that, and I don't understand where it's coming from on the Democrat side. No one is talking about wanting this. There are a lot of things that need to happen in the military, equipment that we need to fund, modernization that needs to be funded, but not compelling women to enter the draft. I mean, no one is talking about this back in Tennessee. And when they bring it up, the Democrats, it's almost universal pushback.
So, Congressman Green, as the House begins to mark up its version of the National Defense Authorization Act, does this stay in? Is this something that advances to the House floor?
I would be surprised to see it advance to the House floor, but with the Democrat Party today, I'm being surprised almost daily about some of the stuff that they're pushing. Things that just make no sense, like defund the police and now defund the Pentagon. The administration forwarded a budget request to us for the appropriations side, which isn't, the National Defense Authorization Act talks about money, but it's more about authorizing certain programs as opposed to the funding side, which is done through the appropriations process. But no one's talking about this in the House side. It kind of surprised nearly all of us. So who knows what the Democrats are going to do? I can't make a prediction. But I know on the Republican side, there's no one's saying they support it.
Well, I hope you're successful in keeping that from the House version of the bill and that it doesn't make its way into a study or a conference committee between the two chambers. Other issues that our listeners should be watching for in the National Defense Authorization Act?
I think the biggest piece of it, Tony, that concerns me is a lot of the Green New Deal stuff that they're sort of forcing onto the military. There are a lot of things that we need to do. And right now we have a demand from the situation internationally, both Russia and China advancing their militaries, both with technology and the size of their military. You look at Russia just this last week announced an F-35 equivalent, basically a 5th generation fighter that would compete with our F-35, their fighter. They even, when they announced it, had painted on the side of the aircraft in English, checkmate. And here we are, advancing green technologies that are going to take dollars away from equipment that would contend with Russia and China. China, of course, is last month they commissioned 3 new naval vessels. They're averaging about 3 Navy ships a month. Their Navy already is larger than ours. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is cutting the defense budget in real dollars by $4 billion, while he's increasing spending across the board in other programs by 16%. So it's pretty clear where the Biden administration stands. I don't think, someone like Chairman Smith is gonna agree to that. I mean, Chairman Smith is one of the more reasonable Democrats, and I'll just say it like that. But I know, wants to see our military equipped with cutting edge technology. So that, I think the biggest thing to watch for is just the liberal stuff that gets inserted into the bill.
That raises another question, Congressman Green. When you look at the spending priorities, given what you just laid out, and there's plenty more we could talk about with Iran, we could talk more about China and what they're doing to leverage their influence around the world. Does this administration not see the threats that are out there?
They obviously don't, especially with regard to China. You look at the approach they're taking to the Indo-Pacific, the approach they're taking with the way we're withdrawing from Afghanistan, and China is filling that void through Pakistan and its relationships with Pakistan. It's pretty clear that they don't have the correct understanding of what's going on. A great example is what was happening in the Ukraine with Russia and its military buildup on the Ukrainian border. Biden's knee-jerk response was actually good. He decided to send 2 destroyers into the Black Sea as a sort of, hey, don't do this. And Vladimir Putin picked up the phone and called Biden, and Biden changed his mind. So he just doesn't have the strength to push back on these, what I call totalitarian dictators.
Speaking of priorities of the Biden administration, you have countered one of those priorities, been pushing back on their focus on critical race theory in our military academies.
Yeah, first let me say there was recently an article published or a study published, it was commissioned by the military to look at the impacts on readiness. And this was a 3-star Marine general and an admiral, a Navy admiral. And their perspective was that there was too much time spent on diversity training and things like that at the expense of actually training them how to sail a ship, just the blocking and tackling of being in the Navy. So now this critical race theory is being taught at our military academies. And my biggest problem with critical race theory is, and there are lots of problems with it, but my biggest problem is that the mechanism they use in that theory to actually counter past discrimination is future discrimination, which is against the United States law. I mean, it's against the law to discriminate on the basis of race. And so to suggest that as a viable mechanism to undo past discrimination is absurd. And if you look at just the unit cohesion, and I've been to combat, you look to the man or woman to your left and right, and it's about team. It's about defending one another. If you're teaching them that a particular race is inherently racist because of the color of their skin, judge people on the basis of the color of their skin, you're destroying unit cohesion. It makes no sense whatsoever that a fighting force could go to war and contend with each other, against an enemy with each other when you're teaching these kinds of theories. Right. The other thing, the base premise of it is that America is a racist country. Well, who wants to defend and fight for and potentially die for a nation that you're being taught is racist?
Right.
And we know that's not the case. America is an amazing country. What nation has ever done what we did? There are 9,000 dead Americans on the beach at Normandy. And after we win that war, we go in and rebuild the very country that started the war. Billions of American dollars to rebuild Germany, to rebuild Japan, the very countries that killed us and started a war with us. No country in the history of mankind has ever done anything like that. Yet here they are saying that our nation is a bad nation. Have we made mistakes? Absolutely. Have we learned from and corrected those mistakes? Yes, of course. And that should be celebrated. not denigrate it.
The CRT, I mean, it's sowing those seeds of discord, division, and distrust, but it's also, as you pointed out earlier, taking away valuable time that should be spent on what the military's purpose is. That is fighting and winning wars. And you got to train in order to win. You got to train, and you only have so much time in a day.
That's right. You know, when I went to war, the product of many, many people's labors over the course of the years prior to me going in 2003, the culmination of years of research and development to produce the very best equipment, some of the best training mechanisms, our training centers, the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California, the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, the investments both in time and money and research to build those systems. It was what we would call significant overmatch. It wasn't even a fair fight. And when we send Americans to war, our sons and daughters, it should never be a fair fight. And yet right now with China and Russia, it's near parity on many of the weapon systems. Missiles, China now has the largest missile force in the world. Russia's asymmetric warfare is we're learning from what they've done in Ukraine. So any distraction to preparing our armed forces, those men and women who will defend our nation, defend freedom across the world, distracting them from doing two things, learning how to kill people and break things, is going to put their lives at risk and our freedom and sovereignty at risk. And that's what the Biden administration is doing.
Yeah, there's a high price to pay when you get cheap on national defense.
Amen.
I want to switch gears. We just got a few minutes left. In addition to the National Defense Authorization Act that's going to be dealt with in the House, probably before you all break for the August recess, you've got a number of appropriations bills that are moving their way through, and something very significant is missing from those appropriations bill, like the labor and HHH bill, the labor and H bill that deals with abortion funding. For the first time, we're not seeing the Hyde Amendment on the labor funding bill.
Yeah, that is very disturbing, Tony. I mean, the Hyde Amendment has probably saved 2 million lives. But the Biden administration is so beholden. In fact, most Democrats are so beholden to Planned Parenthood and the billions of dollars that they make from basically terminating life. They're now basically trying to take that Hyde Amendment out, and U.S. taxpayer dollars will be able to fund overseas abortions. And it's really interesting to see how the Democrat Party has changed over time. I mean, even Joe Biden himself in 1994 said, no one, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, no one should be forced to violate their conscience and support an abortion. So they've come a long way, and they are slaves to this master, and that master is Planned Parenthood.
It's fascinating to watch, and I've seen that in my 18 years here, where we used to have pro-life Democrats. They don't exist anymore. And you have a party that is wholly sold out to the abortion industry and Planned Parenthood. But the flip side of that is we have a Republican Party that in the House, there's not a single openly pro-choice Republican that I'm aware of now after 2018. You have a solidly committed pro-life Republican conference.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know of a single one of my colleagues who isn't pro-life. Some define life in different stages. I know for me, it's conception. But you look at some of the laws or bills at the state level that Democrats have pushed, even during the act of labor, to be able to terminate the life of a child. And it's unconscionable. But that's where their party is.
Congressman Green, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today and for leading the fight there on Capitol Hill.
Yes, sir. Have a great day. Thanks for having me.
All right. Congressman Mark Green of Tennessee. Okay.